tell me when. Okay, all right. Usually I spruce myself up before the video starts. All right, so just a quick review of teams before we start on the topic for today is communication, and that's where we'll spend most of our time. But in the lecturettes that you had from Dr. Kanoff on Canvas, the focus was on teams, the composition of teams, the characteristics of teams, the processes that teams use, and communication is the core process that teams use. It's the sort of foundational process. So I just want to back up for just a second and review teams. So this was the definition. I've shortened it a bit. This is the definition out of the book, also discussed by Dr. Kanoff. 2 or more people working interdependently to accomplish common goals. So the 3 important parts of that definition: 2 or more people, 1 person can't be a team, interdependently, and common goals. So if in this class, in your teams in this class, if you decide to work in the following way, person 1, you answer question 1. Person 2, you answer question 2. 3, answer 3. 4, answer question 4. Person 5, you just pull all these together and turn them in. If that's the way you proceed to work on assignments in this class, that's not a team. That is not interdependence. Interdependence suggests that people actually share ideas, build on each other's thoughts and concerns, and hopefully through that process of sharing and building on each other's ideas, you end up with an outcome from the team that's better than any one individual or even the average of individuals could do without working together. And that's what we call process gain. And we're going to focus a little bit later here on that topic of process gain. So again, just to review, these were the things that you did for today. You watched the clips from Ocean's 11, and I actually want to go back and just show the first 3 minutes. This was about a 12 or 13 minute video clip, as I remember, from the movie Ocean's 11. I just want to make sure that we all understood as we watched that video the enormous amount of information that we can gain by watching an effective team being formed. And that's what happens in the first 9 minutes of the video segment, is that team gets formed. And if you remember in the readings, teams go through a developmental process that's called form, storm, norm, and perform, and then adjourn as the last process. And you can see in that clip of Ocean's 11 that pretty much happening, and that communication as the foundational process. So let's just take a quick review of the Ocean's 11 clip in just the first 3 minutes. We're not going to play it all.
Just out of curiosity, which casinos did you geniuses pick to rob?
The Bellagio, the Mirage, and the MGM Grand.
Those are Terry Benedict's casinos.
Is that right? That's right.
You guys, what do you got against Terry Benedict?
What do you have against him? That's the question.
He torpedoed my casino, muscled me out. Now he's gonna blow it up next month to make way for some gaudy monstrosity. Don't think I don't see what you're doing.
What are we doing, Ruben?
You're gonna steal from Terry Benedict. You better goddamn know. This sort of thing used to be civilized. You'd hit a guy, he'd whack you, done. But with Benedict, at the end of this, you better not know you're involved, not know your names, or think you're dead, because he'll kill you, and then he'll go to work on you.
That's why we have to be very careful, very precise, well funded.
Yeah. You gotta be nuts, too. And you're gonna need a crew as nuts as you are. What do you got in mind?
All right, who's in?
Frank C is in. Frank C has developed a bad case of bronchitis and is putting in for a transfer to warmer climates. What about drivers?
Talked to the Malloys yesterday.
Mormon twins?
They're both in Salt Lake City, 6 months off the job. Got the sense they're having trouble filling the hours.
Waiting, sweetheart, just waiting.
Good? Go.
Waiting for you.
Come on.
Go, little girl. You're like a little girl.
Relax.
Just do this
Good?
all day.
Go.
Don't miss. I'm gonna get out of the car and I'm gonna drop you like third period French, okay? Stop talking. Go.
Okay, so you notice this was just the very beginning, but Elliot Gould says you're going to need a team of people that are crazy, and so they begin to assemble the team. So the characteristics of putting this team together, what we're looking for in terms of composition is we're looking for a good deal of diversity. And you notice that if you followed this through after picking the first 7 or 8 folks, you get a feel that everybody is being chosen for a particular expertise. So the Malloy twins in Salt Lake City, they're being picked because they're excellent drivers for the escape vehicles. And they pick a munitions person, and they pick an electronics expert. And so they basically assemble a team that is highly diverse. All right, that's the composition aspect of putting a team together. And then you have to make sure that for a team to work effectively, you have to make sure that everybody understands the goal. So as each one of these team members is recruited, if you watched in the video, they developed an appreciation and understanding for exactly what this team was going to accomplish. And equally important, everybody has to understand exactly what their roles were. And much of the video clip in the early first 9 minutes anyway was devoted to making sure that everybody understood, okay, the munitions person is going to do this, the electronics person is going to do this, or the driver is going to do something different. And during that process, then, relationships get built. And as you know, for a team to work, especially a team of relative strangers in this case, how are we going to work together if we don't trust each other? So we've got to begin to build relationships. Leadership in this case is very interesting to watch. Of course, George Clooney is the leader. And it is a team of 11. That's another compositional factor in here. It's a team of 11 people. We put you in teams in this class in groups of 5, and we did that very, very purposefully, because groups of 5 are about the right size to have conversation, share ideas and opinions, and make decisions. Group of 11 is a little bit too big to do that, carry that off. So you tend to have an overarching leader who's going to make the decisions. But one of the things that's interesting about this video clip in terms of leadership is that George Clooney, while he is clearly the leader of this band of 11, he also shares leadership with people in certain situations when they have more expertise related to a particular topic than he does. And this is probably one of the characteristics of a pretty good leader, is somebody who understands what they're good at and when they should call the shots themselves, and what they're not so knowledgeable about and when they should bring in other people to help make those kinds of decisions. So leadership is interesting to watch. Cohesion also builds as the clip goes on, and that's important later on when the team encounters some problems. that they didn't anticipate, and they have to be very creative and adaptable to help make this whole thing work well. And throughout all of those processes, whether it's building the diversity of the team, sharing goals, communicating role expectations, providing leadership, all of that relies upon the foundational process of communication. So that's what we're going to spend most of our time talking about. Just one other topic, though, just a quick reminder about process gain and process loss. The textbook talks about this. Dr. Kenoff in his lecturettes talked about it, and we mentioned it in the Carter racing exercise last lab on a week Thursday. So process gain is another word for synergy, where the group achieves something bigger and better than any individual working on his or her own would be able to do. And this is the kind of marker of an effective team, because if you put a bunch of people together and you achieve less than they could have achieved on their own, then obviously you've not accomplished the whole purpose of establishing a team. Okay. All right, one last thing before we turn our attention to communication. So I've mentioned before, I really appreciate that the textbook at the end of most chapters has a figure, something like this, that helps us sort of summarize, what are the effects of doing a better job in a particular area. In this case, teamwork processes, so communicating, leading, influencing, resolving conflicts, those kinds of internal team processes. If we do those well, it has a modest effect on team performance and a very strong effect on team commitment. So you can sort of picture that if you're on a team where the decision making is done well and people communicate effectively with each other, really listen to each other's opinions, build on each other's ideas, then people are more committed to working on that team than they might be otherwise, and also modestly more effective. So useful figure, useful summary. All right, let's turn our attention to communication. So communication assumptions. Do you assume that others tend to listen to you and that you're a good listener? Well, here's some research results. Communication, email is one form of communication, telephone another one. Communicator believes he's clearly communicating. In both cases, about 3/4 of people think that they're pretty clearly communicating their message, whether it's via email or by phone. Receiver believes correctly interpreting. Receiver's pretty confident. Yeah, I think I understood what the person was trying to say, 89 and 91% of the time. But the actual interpretation, when checked via research and getting feedback, notice that particularly for email, there's quite a gap between what people think they're taking away from a message, an email, and what the actual intent of the message was. And there's also a reasonably large gap in telephone conversation. But at least in telephone, you can listen to the nuances of the voice. You can't see the other person, but you can hear things in their voice, the tone, the pace, etc., that you don't. And frequently, there's more being said in a telephone conversation too than a lot of emails are kind of cryptic, short, to the point, etc. And so people may be missing part of the message that way as well. So bottom line is that we're not as effective communicating typically as we think we are, and we're not as good listeners as we think we are. So major barrier in effective communication is that we simply don't listen. And sometimes we think we're listening, we really aren't. And I've got one of my favorite video clips. This is just over a minute. Maybe some of you have seen this before, but it pretty effectively illustrates not listening.
It's just, there's all this pressure, And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on.
Ow.
If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on?
All right, it's not about the nail. So people think they're listening, but maybe instead of really listening to what the person is saying, instead you're focusing on how to fix the problem that's being described in this particular case. We'll come back to that in a minute. So if we're not listening, what are we actually doing? Well, one of the things that people are frequently doing when they're listening or not listening is that they're judging, evaluating, approving, or disapproving. So we are 2 weeks away from the presidential election. Thank goodness that's going to be over soon. And if you are now deeply entrenched in one side or the other, whether it's Republican or Democrat, and you're listening to the candidate of the other party, you're probably not really listening to that person. You're judging, you're evaluating, you're thinking to yourself, this is, if he or she were to say this to me, this is how I would respond, how I would rebut the argument that this person is making, etc. So you're paying more attention to your internal thoughts than you are to what the other person is saying, thinking of what we want to say, or in some cases just zoning out and not attending to the message at all, paying attention to what's on your phone or computer or whatever, rather than listening to the person that's talking. So, do you assume that others tend to listen to you, and do you assume that you're a good listener? And what if you didn't make those assumptions? Suppose you assume that other people were not listening. Would that change the way you communicate? So we're going to give some tips here in a minute on how we might communicate if you sort of start with the assumption that maybe other people aren't listening. What if you assumed that you yourself were not a very good listener, and how would that change the way that you would communicate on your own? So this is a figure from the textbook, and the problem in talking about communication as a topic is that it seems so simple. And we've all been communicating ever since we were born. When we were laying in the crib, we figured out ways to communicate our needs to our parents, those of us who were taking care of us. And we've been building those communication skills ever since, often without really taking a step back and thinking about how incredibly complicated communication actually is. And that's why I like this figure from the textbook, because it shows that basically, there's at least 6 steps that need to take place successfully and sequentially for a message that the sender intends to send to be accurately received and interpreted and understood by the receiver. There's just multiple ways in which that message can get lost or can get garbled. And the sender has to encode the message somehow. I'm encoding what I'm saying to you right now in English. If I were to be speaking in Yiddish instead of English, that encoding process probably would not break through, and for the vast majority of students in the class would not be achieving any understanding from that. So how the message gets encoded into what language, how big of words, what kind of sentence structure, all those kinds of things. Do we say the message? Do we write the message? Exactly how do we encode it, and then try and send it through some channel of communication? And the problem with the channels of communication is that there's noise in those channels. Noise, there's two types of noise. There's physical noise and there's psychological noise. Physical noise in a classroom would be people shuffling feet, or the noise of the projector, or moving papers around on tabletop, etc. But probably even more distracting from actually understanding what the sender is trying to say is the psychological noise, the noise that we talked about in the previous slide, where I'm thinking of something different, I'm thinking of a rebuttal, I'm questioning the credibility of the source of information, and I'm thinking about lots of things other than trying to really understand what it is that the person's saying. So it's got to break through this message, it's got to break through all these barriers, whether it's physical noise or psychological noise, so that it's actually attended to, and then the receiver of the message has to decode properly. Again, if you don't understand the words, if you can't see the written page, whatever, it can't be decoded properly and translated to some understanding that the receiver has. The only way that sender and receiver can know if the message was accurately transmitted is through this feedback loop. And everybody pretty much knows that. So most of the time we don't ask people to restate or rephrase what they heard us just say, because that would slow communications down terribly, and most of the time we just sort of assume that the message that we're sending is getting through to the receiver. But if it's a really important situation, you're having a major conflict with your roommate or whatever, really important situation that demands that each party really understand each other, then asking the other person to try and state back what they thought you said is actually a pretty good technique. And I've used this actually in consulting capacity from time to time in organizations with a manager and an employee who just can't seem to get along. And the problems that they're having are escalating and getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so it's sort of like marriage counseling in a sense between two people on the job, to get them to actually communicate with each other, and start by asking them to restate what they heard the other person say. So that feedback loop, pretty useful, particularly in situations where it's really important that communication take place. As receivers, what must we do to really hear what's being said, knowing that we're inclined not to listen well? So here's some receiver techniques. Develop and practice active listening. Be actively present. Choose a good time and place. Resist distractions. Suspend judgment. Convey presence to the sender. So you know non-verbally, you know when somebody's listening to you non-verbally because they're leaning forward. The head is tilted slightly forward. There's eye contact. There's an occasional nodding of the head at appropriate times. That's how you know non-verbally that somebody. So if you're trying to listen really intently to what somebody has to say, then conveying presence to the sender is certainly part of that. Resisting distractions. Find a good time and a place. I usually, if I've got an important conversation to have, I always try and set a specific time. Usually go to a coffee shop or something like that, sit around a table informally and have that conversation. So if you try and do it at the office, then the phone rings or some colleague stops by or something like that. So find a good time and a place and try and resist distractions. This is all if you really want to hear what somebody has to say. Rephrase what was said. That's what we talked about earlier. That's what active listening means, is that from time to time, the listener will say, now, what I think I heard you say was X. Again, you don't want to overuse that. It becomes very annoying. I had a graduate class one time with a couple of communication master students that were in our management class, and it seemed like every time somebody said something, they would say, well, what I think I hear you saying is, well, about the third time somebody says that, you just want to slap them. I mean, stop it. We don't need that much clarification. But again, really important statements from time to time, rephrasing, asking clarifying questions, and provide summaries of both facts and feelings. So Jason Headley, it's not about the nail video that we just showed. obviously what the girlfriend was looking for was some understanding, not of the facts, not the fact that I've got a nail in my head, but I want you to understand the feelings that I'm expressing. Right? And so to be able to demonstrate that, you need to summarize what you hear the person saying, both facts and feelings. All right, now as senders, the other side of the, so we got the receivers covered, now the senders, what must we do to communicate effectively? These kind of tips might be useful in your class presentation of your best practices project at the end, thinking about how to make sure or try and improve the likelihood that people listening to your presentation will actually walk away with the correct understanding of what you said. So create a context for listening, proactively manage the noise, so do the best you can to try and minimize distractions in the room where you're making a presentation. Choose a good time and a place. Consider the needs of the receiver and entice the receiver. So in communication theory, sometimes we talk about listening to WIIFM radio. WIIFM radio. So WIIFM stands for what's in it for me. What's in it for me. So receivers, to entice a receiver to try and listen, that's what, of course, what professors often do. So now this could be on the exam, right? Oh, okay. Now it's time to listen. What's in it for me? I know that what he or she is about to say is pretty important. So try and entice the listener, encourage them to listen. I usually try and warn students when I'm about to get to the good stuff. This is the good stuff. Now you want to pay attention there. Encode the message appropriately. Be sure you understand your own message. So this is like think before you talk. We all have problems with that from time to time, not thinking before we talk. Adapt to the audience. So you sort of have to figure out, at what vocabulary level do you need to be speaking at a grade school level, or a high school level, or a college level, or a graduate school level, in terms of vocabulary and vernacular and the terms that you're using, the sentence structure that you use when you make a presentation. So adapting to the audience, figuring out what their interests are, what their needs are, etc. Using appropriate channels, especially multiple channels. So in presentations, we always have some combination of verbal and visual that we're presenting to somebody. So I'm using PowerPoint slides. Another option would be handouts, or another option would be writing on a whiteboard or on a flip chart as you're making a presentation. The point is that having multiple channels where you're communicating the important points, both in auditory form, verbal form, but also in some visual form as well, so that people can go back and forth between those two. Because some people are better auditory learners and others are better visual learners. Be congruent, avoid mixed messages. So you don't want to say, I am not angry, while you're pounding on the desk. I actually saw that in a meeting one time. I am not angry, pounding on the desk, veins sticking out in the neck, face flushed. I am not angry. If you're incongruent in your messages, so your verbals and your nonverbals don't match up, people are confused about which to interpret and generally will believe the nonverbals typically over the verbals. And then check with the receiver for comprehension. So again, if it's an important message, you really want people, you want to be sure that the receiver on the other end of the communication has heard what you said accurately. Then this is the situation where you would want to ask for feedback. All right, so last slide. This is in the textbook, and this is communication roles that can occur in a team. And as I think about this, as I look through the text, I'm envisioning myself as a student, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm a student, I'm reading this, I look at this material and I say, wow, that's a lot of stuff. And it's a lot of stuff in one table, first of all. yeah, it looks interesting, but I'll just keep reading. All right? I might come back to it if I feel like there's some value to it. So I want to bring us back to it because I really believe that there's a good deal of value in this. What this figure or this table basically says is that every communication that takes place within a team, your team, all the teams that you're on, every single utterance of an individual in a team setting can be placed in some kind of role category. Some kind of role category. So if somebody on the team says, "Oh, I think we should meet at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning," all right? That's proposing a new idea. That person, that one utterance, has fulfilled the role of initiator contributor. If somebody on the team says, "Well, I think before we talk about how we're going to answer number one, I think we ought to review what the professor's expectations are for these kinds of questions." Right? That utterance, that particular single speech by a team member is filling the role of orienter, according to this breakdown. Somebody says, "Well, I see everybody on the team has decided that we're going to answer this question this way, but I wonder if we really shouldn't think about the other alternatives before we quickly decide to go that way." That role, the role of devil's advocate, has just been filled by that communication. So I'm not suggesting that people are necessarily taking particular roles. I'm saying that the communication that they make fulfills a certain role on the team. So if somebody says, "Oh man, I'm really pumped about this next case. I think we should get an early start on this. I have a feeling that we can get a really good grade on case number 2." That person is fulfilling the sort of energizer role. Again, at that particular point in time, he or she may move on to a contributor or a devil's advocate or a procedural technician. Somebody says, "Well, let me take notes from this team meeting and sort of write up the results of what we've done." Well, that person that's agreed to that particular utterance again is fulfilling the role of procedural technician. So you see, then there's probably others that you could put up here, but the idea is that each one of these communication types under team task roles moves the team in the direction of accomplishing its task. Right? What's insightful about this is that it identifies actually 2 categories of communications that help a team be effective, because a team can't always be working on task. Occasionally, a team needs some bucking up as a team, some cohesion building, some esprit de corps building, some focus on building the team itself. Right? And these are the kinds of things under team building roles. These are the kinds of things that could be done that would help to facilitate a feeling of cohesion, a feeling of esprit de corps. So, somebody who praises the contributions of other team members, that's an encouraging role, an encouraging communication. Harmonizing if there's differences of opinion. Standard setting, expressing the goals for the team to achieve. Follower obviously is an important role. Gatekeeper, often overlooked the importance of this role on a team. Typically in a team, some members take up more airtime than other members. In a team of 5, it's not uncommon to have reasonably equal distribution of participation or communication. That's one of the reasons we keep the team to 5. As teams get bigger and bigger, like if you got to Daniel Ocean's 11 team members, then in most team meetings, you're going to find that 2 or 3 people take up 80% of the airtime. And when that happens, then it's really important that somebody step in and invite the quiet people to join the conversation so that they don't feel completely left out. So a gatekeeper is somebody, or is a role where someone encourages participation of others who have maybe been kind of on the sidelines, left out of the discussion, have been less involved in communication. We're not going to talk about individualistic roles. These are roles that don't move the team in the direction of accomplishing its task or being effective. But it's important to note that effective teams, and there's research on this that's pretty good, demonstrating that effective teams tend to spend about 80% of their time engaging in task-oriented communications, and about the other 20% of their time in team-building kinds of communications. So that's a nice mix, and you can sort of help your team be more effective if you notice that, oh geez, all we're doing is encouraging, harmonizing, and following. You know, we need to spend more time up here, so you can jump in and initiate and coordinate and volunteer to be procedural technician. Or you can notice that the team is spending all of its time on task, and you may interject a little harmonizing, a little humor, a little gatekeeping from time to time, etc. So the idea is that knowing that both of these are necessary for effective teams, and being able to be flexible and fill roles that are missing from time to time. It's really, sometimes in a team, you've had this happen where there's a conversation goes on and on and on. Somebody steps in and says, okay, well, let me summarize where I think we are at this particular point in the team's conversation. Well, that's a very useful task role to fill at a particular point in time. So in the management major, we have an upper level course in teams. We spend a lot of time talking about and explaining and becoming well versed in identifying differences between task and team building roles, when to fill in, and how to make teams more effective. And so that's the purpose of this, and I didn't want that to go by without people understanding the value of this distinction between task and team building roles. Okay, so that's it for the lecture part. We're going to take a short break at this point, and when we come back, we've got a little exercise to work on.